Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Juliet, a member of the Wellbeing Coaches team here at Vitality, and I'm delighted to be hosting today's discussion on building healthy financial habits. So if you've attended any other events this month, you'll know that our theme for February is establishing healthy behaviours. And our programme has been packed with events highlighting the healthy habits we can adopt to improve our overall well-being. But today we're focusing on financial well-being specifically, and the timing feels like it couldn't be more appropriate given that personal finances are likely to be front of mind for many of us at the moment. With inflation reaching a 30-year high last month and predicted to peak in April, along with soaring household costs, things are looking pretty bleak in the news. But all the more reason to focus on our financial well-being and the steps we can take to take better care of our personal finances. So today I'm thrilled to be joined by financial educator and founder of This Girl Talks Money, Ellie Austin-Williams. Ellie provides online coaching, talks and workshops on financial well-being. She's built up an online community of over 18,000 people by sharing a wealth of knowledge and advice that simply makes money make sense. So today, Ellie and I will be discussing breaking the taboo about talking about money, healthy financial habits you can incorporate into your daily routine, tools and technology to help manage your money, and much, much more. But a few quick things to mention before I ask Ellie to join me here on screen. Thank you so much to those of you who sent in your questions when you registered for this event. We'll do our very best to answer as many of those as we possibly can throughout the discussion. We'll be here for an hour today and we'll save the last 15 minutes for an open Q&A. So if you have a question in the moment, please feel free to submit it. You can click, there's a question mark on the right-hand side of your screen, a question box will pop up, and Vitality Coach Jamie is there behind the scenes getting back to you and sending those questions over to me so that I can send them on to Ellie. You'll also find on the right-hand side of your screen a handout section where you'll find our calendar of events for the rest of the month. So please do take a look and register for any events that spark your interest, because we'd love to see you there. So without further ado, Ellie, if you'd like to turn your camera and join me here on screen. Let's see if we've got Ellie. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for joining me.
I'm really good, thank you. I'm really looking forward to having a chat.
I know, we've been really looking forward to having you. The office is buzzing. Everybody's really looking forward to this event. It's such a hot topic and one that I know everybody has been really looking forward to. And like I said, we had some brilliant pre-registered questions. So again, everyone, I can't stress enough, if you've got any other questions, get them in now because Ellie is the expert and we've got her here ready to answer for you. So we've only got an hour, and Ellie, we've talked about, haven't we? There's so much to cover in this conversation, so I want to jump straight in there with something that we talked about in a sort of when we first met around, you know, the first step really to getting a handle on your personal finances and reaching your financial goals is to really open up the conversation around money. And I know that's one of your personal goals, isn't it, in your business, is to really break that taboo, because money's not something that we tend to enjoy talking about, particularly as Brits, right?
Yeah.
But how can talking about money make a positive difference to our financial well-being, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to kind of reiterate what you said, it is one of the first things and one of the most impactful things that we can do to actually start to change our financial circumstances, because finances, our money, affects every single area of our life, whether we want it to or not. It impacts our relationships, it impacts our work, it impacts our friendships, and the more we avoid talking about it, the more we allow issues to rise up and to impact our lives, when actually a conversation could have helped the circumstances. So I saw a statistic recently which suggested that something like half of couples, when they move in together, don't know what each other earns. And
Wow.
that really kind of took me by surprise, because ultimately when you are combining your lives together, like when you're working together in a partnership, then there is an element of needing to have a level of trust and transparency between you, and also having that information to hand allows you together to make the best decisions for both of you. Whereas if you are there trying to guess what your partner's thinking, what they're doing, how they feel about money, then it can really leave you kind of lost with all of these assumptions in your head. And when it comes to money, assumptions are one of the things that get us into the stickiest situations.
Absolutely. And how do you do, because that's what an interesting statistic, my goodness. Because the other thing that I know that is very sort of can be a bit of an issue in partnerships, personal partnerships, is that people have different attitudes and approaches to money. So you might, in a couple, for example, have someone who is more of a spender, and you might have the other person might be more of a saver. And then you get these sort of sticky situations or possibly points of conflict, right, when it comes to trying to reach your financial goals as a couple. So how do you start those conversations, say, particularly if you do feel that perhaps you're coming from two different points of view?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. And I think there's a term, financial compatibility, which is often bandied around. And I think people think that it means that you should be with someone, or that you need to find someone that has the same view of money as you. But that is not true. And it's also not realistic, because we all have our own perspectives and our own beliefs about money, which we have had from childhood. That's a whole nother topic we could talk about for hours, but how we come to believe what we believe about money. But what it really is about when it comes to a partnership is communicating what your view is, and also being open to listening to the view of your partner. And it's often about collaborating and compromise. Ultimately, it's not about saying you're wrong, I'm right, this is how we should do it. It's about trying to understand their perspective, why it is that they actually have the beliefs that they have, because often it will be from events that have happened in their childhood, or from things that they've observed with their parents or their caregivers, and working together to try and actually find a way that you can manage money and move towards your goals together and support one another. And I always say to people, don't jump into this like head first. Like, this isn't saying, on date number one, ask someone for their pay slip. Like, it's not at all about that. But it's about taking those opportunities that arise when money's in the news, or when you watch a TV program, or you hear a podcast that mentions this topic. And there are a lot of them around at the moment which are very topical, where money is a big issue. It's about, when you hear those, using those as a way into a conversation and saying, oh, I heard this story, or I spotted this in the news. What do you think about that? Like, have you got any views? How do you feel about X, Y, Z? And opening the conversation in a way that feels more natural, so that you start to build that trust with each other on the topic of money, because it is uncomfortable for a lot of us, and a lot of our instincts are to become defensive or to close off when someone asks or questions our approach of, or our way of doing things. So using kind of third party or cultural references to start the conversation can really help take that kind of pressure and intimidation out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly in the sort of early stages of a relationship, I'm sure that's really key, isn't it? And then I think actually, I think what's interesting personally as well, as somebody who's been in like a long-term relationship, is that money then, and I'm sure this speaks for a lot of people here, as you do with lots of things in a relationship, you take responsibility for different areas of your lives together, and one of those is finances. And often one person takes that role of, okay, I do the finances, I sort the bills out and all of that. And that can be, it's handy, but also it can leave one feeling in the dark. So it's important to keep those conversations going, isn't it? And I think it's such a good tip really there, of even at that stage in a relationship, taking cues from what's in the news, making sure that you're sitting down and talking about changes to rising inflation rates, and talking about household bills, and making sure that you're a team on that.
Absolutely. And I think, you kind of hit the nail on the head there with one of the big issues that does tend to happen, is that one person will take the lead. And historically, and still typically, that tends to be the male in a partnership. And it doesn't have to be. And I mean, there are two kind of things to remember here. It doesn't have to be. It can be whichever partner you are most comfortable with it being. But even if it is a case that you do not want to take responsibility for those finances, you hate numbers, you don't want to be looking around for the latest deals, checking your bills, that's totally okay. But make sure that you are still in the loop. So make sure that you know what is going on in your household finances. If it's a case of saying, every payday, let's just sit down for 10 minutes. Can you to the partner who does run it, can you explain to me what's going on? Can you just give me an overview of where we're at? Can you like just, you know, show me a rundown of what's in our bank accounts, what's in our savings, what's on our credit cards? Asking those questions is so important, because often it's really easy to start off being out of the loop and then to find yourself years down the line having no idea what's going on. And I think it is so helpful both for you individually to have that oversight and knowledge of your financial situation, but also it helps your relationship, because it doesn't leave your partner thinking that they are fully responsible for it, but it also protects you, because you don't want to find yourself in a situation where your partner has gone and made all of these financial decisions that impact you without you being aware. So I would always say, yeah, have a monthly sit down, even if it's 10 minutes, put it on payday or afterwards. It's always a good time to do it, and just chat through where you're at, how you're feeling, and it'll start to become easier.
Absolutely. And it's because we're going to talk about habits, aren't we, and daily or regular habits that you can set up. And I think that's the first one, isn't it? If you're in a group household, sit down and talk about money on a regular basis and like schedule it in, because that is really important, and you can spend that time budgeting or like you say, just making sure that both are fully aware of what's going on. The other thing, and I hadn't necessarily planned to talk about this, but I think as a parent myself, I have 2 children and one of them is now 11. So anybody watching who has children, it's sort of over the last few years for me I have been sort of become more aware of the fact that I need to teach him about money, and you know, we need to start having certain appropriate conversations with the kids, and you know, helping him manage his pocket money and all of that as well is really, it's a good opportunity, isn't it, to sort of with generation try and make sure they feel comfortable talking about money, and that they've got a little bit more of a handle on it than maybe
Absolutely.
I did.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing, like the sooner you can start introducing these conversations, and like you say, you know, obviously like they have to be like altered for the age of the child, but the sooner you can have those conversations, the more kind of chance you're giving them to build up that confidence and knowledge about finances, which I think for so many of us, we maybe didn't have. And they will already at, you know, age 11 have ideas that they've picked up about money and spending and saving, and having those conversations gives you an opportunity to explore those a bit more before they hit adulthood and are let loose on the world of finance.
Absolutely. Great. And then, I mean, the other sort of forum in which I guess it's important to open up the conversation a little bit more about money is at work. So we talked about at home, but at work is a tricky one, isn't it? Because we were just chatting, weren't we, before we sort of started this morning about, and in fact, a colleague grabbed me this morning on the way in and said, you must talk about the gender pay gap. Now, we don't have time to talk in depth. We could spend a whole day talking about that, Ellie, right? But it's really, really interesting that the gender pay gap did actually increase. It's been steadily decreasing since the 90s, year on year, but it increased last year in 2021, largely due to the pandemic. But I'd like to, because we're not just talking to women today, we've got, I'm sure, lots of men watching and other genders. So, but how do we have those conversations at work about money? Because it still feels very taboo, doesn't it? To ask for more money, or to even just be talking about it, or to even imply that it's important to you can sometimes feel uncomfortable. I know you give lots of great tips about this, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is one of the most uncomfortable circumstances, I think, for a lot of people to be talking about money. And yet it is so important at work that you are having those conversations. And it's something that I talk to so many people about who maybe want to have a conversation about their compensation, and they just haven't yet figured out how to broach the topic. One thing, I mean, there are 2 different things I would say about conversations at work. There are obviously the conversations with your line managers or your bosses or the people that are in charge of your salary, and then there are also conversations with other people. And I think starting with that is quite an important one, because there is still a belief that is held around the country that you cannot talk to your co-workers about salary. The reality is that is not true. You can, but I will caveat that with saying that some companies do have a culture where they make it very uncomfortable for people to do that, and they really discourage it. So I do understand why some people don't feel like they can have those conversations. But what I would say is, if you are in a situation where you are on a good kind of basis with your colleagues and you may suspect that there are differences in pay at a same level, have those conversations. Obviously, the person that you're asking can always say, I'm not comfortable telling you, and you have to respect that. But what I have found has happened a lot of the time is when people do actually open up those conversations, then actually it's really beneficial for both parties, because even if there is a gap and a discrepancy, you know, it's not that person who is responsible for that normally. It's normally down to something else that's going on, and having that information to hand is really going to be powerful if and when you have a conversation with your boss or your line manager. But again, when that being said, you know, when you're going into those conversations with your manager and you're thinking about discussing pay, the absolute best thing you can do is be prepared. And I always say to people, don't think about it as what you think you deserve, because the business doesn't care. Ultimately, it sounds harsh, but they don't. Really, what they care about is how much value you are bringing them. So everything that you say in that conversation needs to be framed from the perspective of the person that you're trying to convince that you should be paid more. So, you know, if you're thinking like, oh, but I work so hard, like I think I should get an extra £5,000 because, you know, I'm really putting in like my heart and soul. Okay, that's great, but they aren't going to pay you for that. They are going to pay you for tangible things that you are bringing to the business. So flip it on its head. Write a list of things that you have done in the last 6 to 12 months to add value to the business or to do your role above and beyond. Ultimately, you are being paid to do the job on your job description. Like, they're not going to increase your salary just for doing that. You need to show them that you are actually bringing more than you are expected to that role. And using data that you can find on the internet, using websites like Glassdoor to do research, speaking to colleagues, finding out what is going on in the market, that is the information that is going to help you to go into that conversation confidently. And back yourself is the other thing. If you're having that conversation, you have to be confident in what you're saying. So however much you have to hype yourself up before you walk into it, do that, and then go in and just own it. And, you know, whatever the outcome, like, give yourself a shot at getting that pay rise.
Yeah, if you don't ask, you don't get, right?
Exactly. And I think there is no scenario where it is more true than in work, because again, it's not to say that these businesses are mean. They're not at all. Like, they want to look after you, but they are businesses, and they are not going to offer you the pay rise that you want a lot of the time without you asking for it, because it doesn't make financial sense. So go in there, ask for it, put your best case forward, and hopefully you'll get some positive results.
Fantastic, love it. We could talk about this for so much longer, but I'm very aware we need to move on. But I would say, if anybody is thinking about having those sorts of conversations at work in the near future, and you want more tips, pop some questions for us in the comments, and we'll try and come to them later. So we did really want to talk about those daily, monthly, weekly, whatever it is, habits, and we spoke about you know, scheduling in discussions about money, say with your partner or your household. That's one great one. But what other daily habits are there, Ellie, that we can all adopt? I've heard one about checking your bank balance every day, which I definitely don't do and really need to start doing. But it's stuff like that, isn't it, that can make such a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So the bank balance thing, what I would say again is that it depends on where you're at the moment. But if you're a person that typically avoids their bank balance until payday, if you don't like looking at it, you avoid it as much as you can and kind of put your head in the sand a little bit about your finances, then building these habits, like getting used to checking your bank account regularly, are going to start to help to shift how you view money and how you have that relationship with it. Because the reason that we often avoid checking our bank balance is a fear of what is in there. And ultimately, what happens a lot of the time is, because we have this fear, we carry on behaving as though things are okay, but in the back of our mind, we've got this anxiety about, oh, well, what is going to be there? Is it going to go through when I pay for something? You know, how much have I spent this week? Oh, I don't want to know. Let's just keep spending and deal with it later. And ultimately, like, it doesn't help you. It's not helping you to have a positive view of money, and it's also not helping you to manage your money better because you don't know how much you've got. Whereas actually, once you start to check your bank account regularly, you start to remove that fear, because the reality is, for most people, other than one day a month, which for me is the first of every month, where everything goes out and it's horrible, most days very little happens in your bank account on a daily basis. And
Yeah.
if you start to check it regularly, you start to know what those numbers are going to look like. You start to already, before you log in, have an idea of how much you've got. And that's where we want to get to, because after a few months of doing that, you can be in a position where you go to pay for something and you know how much you've got in your bank and you know what you'll have afterwards. But to get to that point where you don't need to check it every day, you have to go through the process of checking regularly. And if you're not used to it at all, I would say maybe don't go straight to every day, because that'll probably be overwhelming. But maybe set yourself a reminder to check your bank account every couple of days, log in, have a look, check everything's okay, check that you recognize what's going on, and log out again. It doesn't have to be anything big. It's just getting into that habit and knowing where you stand.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about financial goal setting? Because I know that for many of us, we've got this, I'm sure lots of people more organised than I am with these things, but you might think, well, at some point, I really want to buy a house, or I've got these big goals.
Yeah.
Seem very far off. But would you say that it's important to build financial goal setting into your habits? Is that something that you should be sitting down and doing on a regular basis?
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that I always encourage people to think about financial goals is to be as specific as possible, because as with all goals, the more specific it is, the easier it's going to be to do. And with financial goals, often they can sound quite daunting and intimidating. So, even if it is as simple as, I want to go on a big holiday to Disney World next year. Okay, but how much is that actually going to cost you? And when are you planning on going? So ask yourself all those questions and get as specific as possible. So, when are you actually going? Okay, I want to go next June. So that gives me how many months? Like 15, 16 months to save that amount. How much do I need to save? Do your research, go on, have a look at the packages, figure it out. Once you've got that figure and you've got that time scale, break it down. And I would always break it down into monthly goals. So how much do you need to save each month? But even if you work weekly and you get paid weekly, break it down even further. How much do you need to save each week to get you to that target? Because not only is it making it more kind of tangible, because you can see those chunks, it also is going to motivate you more, because ultimately we as humans are motivated by achievement. And so if you go through months and months and months and you're feeling like you're not getting anywhere, you're more likely to give up and say, whatever, Disney World can wait. But if you've got those small increments that you can see that you're taking those steps towards that ultimate goal, then you're more encouraged every time you hit one to be like, okay, I'm one step closer, let's just keep going to get to the next one. So giving yourself that kind of breakdown that you can follow, that path to get to your goals, is really going to help you to actually hit them.
Yeah, absolutely. And how I've just thought, I saw a question come in before this webinar, and it feels like the right time to pose it, around how do you advise people motivate themselves? So when you're saving for a goal like that, a specific goal, for example, and then life happens and you have things going on. I mean, emergencies are emergencies, but even things that aren't necessarily emergencies, but you think, oh, really want to dip into that pot that is sitting there, and June next year feels really far away, and in the moment you just think, oh, it's fine, I'll take £100 out of this pot and spend it today on something else. How do we sort of stop those bad habits, I guess? How do we break those bad habits of spending?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. And what I would say is, in an ideal world, I would say have a pot of money, try and build a little pot of money, even if it is just a couple of £100s, that is your kind of emergency treat, unexpected pot. So if something comes up, like a weekend away with friends that you haven't factored into your budget, that you've got a little bit there. But I know that that is not possible as well for everybody. In terms of trying to not dip into savings, honestly, the first thing that I think is key to this is making sure that what you're trying to save is realistic and attainable, because so often we set goals that are not realistic. And when I say realistic, I don't just mean can you do it within your paycheck. I mean, can you do it and maintain a level of life that you're happy with? Because ultimately, if you're setting yourself like, I want to save £1,000 a month, but you take home 2,000 and 800 of that is your rent, you've got £200 left. Like, you cannot live like that for an extended amount of time. You know, people can do it for short amounts of time, and if they want to do that, then I totally understand that. But I really think that the key to reaching those goals long term is making the amount that you're trying to save sustainable, so that it is ambitious but not going to eat into your life and ruin your experience of life right now. Because, you know, I don't want people to think that you should be sacrificing everything to get to a financial goal. Like, we don't know what's around the corner. Like, you've got to enjoy life. The other thing I would say as well on that is keep your savings out of sight. And it sounds really simple, but so many people will have their savings with the same bank as their current account. So you log in and you see current account, and then underneath you see your savings account. And personally, I think that that is too easy to access. And so I will always encourage people to set up a savings account with a different bank, where you have to actually log in separately to see those savings. And I've always found that it's so much easier to not touch them when it feels like there's a bit more of a process that you have to go through to get them. And often as well, the better rates that you'll get for savings won't be with the bank account that you bank with anyway. So it can kind of be like a win-win.
Great, such a great tip. You're so right. It's such truth. And I'm sure it's like simple stuff, isn't it? But I think it's things that we all need a reminder of every so often. Because right, you need to make it as hard as possible to dip into that savings pot, unless it's emergencies. So I mentioned in the brief introduction at the beginning of this event, you know, the state of inflation at the moment, the fact that it's set to peak in April, the highest it's been for 30 years, household costs are rising. It's going to be something that I know will be worrying a lot of people. A lot of us will be thinking about it. But have you got any tips of what we can do right now to sort of protect ourselves against that, or prepare for that, or get through it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really scary time to be thinking about money and to be reading the news, because it feels like every week at the moment there is something new that is going to kind of come and like shake our financial worlds. When it comes to inflation, it's really difficult, is what I would start off by saying, because the reality is it is very high, and there are no savings accounts that are coming anywhere near to giving you returns at the rate of inflation. So what you might have noticed are a lot of companies, particularly financial services companies, are, you know, encouraging people to invest their money, because investing is one way that you can hopefully outgrow inflation and actually get returns that are better than inflation. But what I really would say here is you can only do that, only think about that, if that money you don't need to access in the short term. If the reality is you need that money at hand, you need to be able to access it, whether it's for housing, whether it's for school fees, whether it's for living costs, then the reality is you have to sit tight. Be kind of wary, be alert to what the best options out there are, because week on week, different banks and building societies are opening new offers which give slightly better rates on saving. But don't do anything that is rash, and don't panic into locking your money away to somewhere where you can't access it when you maybe need to access it. I think that is the thing that a lot of people don't want to hear, is that for a lot of people the best thing to do is to sit tight at this point. But if you have got money that you can afford to put away and to invest, then that is definitely something to think about. The other thing I would say is it is a good time to just take a look at your expenses. It sounds simple, and again, it might sound like it's kind of stating the obvious, but have a look at what you're spending like month on month, get 3 months worth of bank statements and go through and see what you're actually using versus what you're paying for. Because I do this a couple of times a year, and there are always things that I have signed up for and that I've found myself using for a little bit, and then I forget to cancel them and I'm still paying for them. So although it might not ultimately save you hundreds or thousands, if you can even find those kind of 10, 20 pounds that are spare that you're not using, then actually, you know, every little really does help at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, that was what I was going to ask you, Ellie, was in terms of, so some people asked about the difference between saving and investing, and I think you've already sort of touched on that. But when it comes to investing, because it can feel like you need to have this big bulk sum of money to be able to set aside to do that. But can you do it with a small, can you start with a very small amount?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nowadays, luckily, we're in a world where you can invest very easily from apps and from platforms which don't need you to pay an advisor to do it for you. They are so clever, and they often, now you just have to answer some questions, read kind of a little bit of information, and then you can start investing. And I would say it definitely is worth doing, even if you can only start with 10, 20 pounds a month, because investing is powerful over a long period of time. The power of investing comes from compounding, when growth then grows and then grows. And basically, you need as much time as possible to achieve that. And so even if you're starting with a small amount, you're giving that money the opportunity to grow. But when it comes down to like those key differences between saving and investing, the main one I will always start with is the time horizon. So investing is, it's for the long term. You know, you hear these horror stories about trading, and that is where people are buying and selling things in very short time frames, and you can lose money. But when you're investing over the long term, then the plan and the idea is that you spread your money out. It doesn't mean you're going to get millions overnight, but it means that over 5, 10 plus years, hopefully, if everything goes to plan, your money will grow. Whereas with saving, if it's the best option if you need that money in the next few years.
Great tips. Thank you so much. I know everybody's enjoying these, I can see on the chat. Thank you. So you touched on it there, actually, and we were going to talk about this because I know it's something that you feel quite passionate about, but there are lots of new apps and tools and technology now when it comes to, especially with the rise and popularity of digital banks like Monzo. What are the benefits to kind of adopting those online banking tools or online savings and investing tools?
Yeah, the first thing, I mean, on this one is that a lot of people are still a bit skeptical of them. And I understand it, because I think that often we like familiarity, particularly when it comes to money, because, you know, you want to know that your money is safe. However, in the UK, it is relatively straightforward in terms of whether you're a bank or not. And if you're a bank and you have a banking license, you are protected as a customer, whichever bank you're with. So banking with HSBC or banking with NatWest nowadays is as safe as banking with Monzo or with Starling. They all have the same level of protection for your money. So a lot of people, that is one of the questions that I get asked, is like, is my money safe? Yes, up to £85,000 in any bank account is protected. The big benefit, I think, of the digital banks is that they have been built to help the user to navigate them and to manage their money. So where a lot of older banks, you know, I feel like our relationship with banks used to be quite like functional, and it used to be quite almost like serious, where, you know, you see the bank as a big institution that has all of this money and has all of these rules and is very strict and tells you off if you do one thing badly, and who you have to really impress to get them to help you with your money. I feel like the newer banks feel more like your friend or your big sister, and that might help some people, that might not, but they have been built in a way that really puts the user first. So you can effectively now manage all of your budgeting and all of your spending in one place. So they allow you to split out your current account into lots of smaller different pots, or spaces is what they call them, which effectively still is the same pot of money, but it means that you can really organize it to the level that you want to. So for example, I have pots which are bills pots, so every month all of the bills money goes into there, so we know that the bills money is set aside, and they tell you as well what date each bill's coming out, where it's coming from, which like what the fee is, how much it is compared to last month. It gives you so much more data to work with. And they also have lots of clever little tools as well. So things like roundup tools. So when you spend £1, if something that you're buying is 98p, it will take the 2p and put it into a savings pot for you. So it doesn't sound like much, but it actually adds up quite quickly.
Yeah, all the little things make a difference, right? Over time, like you say, compound.
Yeah.
We're getting so many questions coming in. We'll come back to this in a minute, but lots of people asking it. Well, we talked about savings and savings accounts, and lots of people asking the same thing. It's really hard to find a good interest rate. How do you find the best savings account, and what's your advice when it comes to that? Where do we go looking for it?
Yeah, the place I always say to people to go at any given time is Money Saving Expert. So I'm sure lots of you have heard of it. It's Martin Lewis's website, but on his website, if you go to the savings area, they will always have the top accounts for easy access, fixed rates, and then like the longer term 5-year plus fixes. So that is my go-to every time. And I mean, I think the best at the moment is about 0.7, 0.75, which is really not very much, but they are changing week on week, so it's worth keeping an eye on it. But yeah, definitely go to that site for up-to-date information.
Great. And then equally lots of questions when it comes to investing as a beginner. So I think you touched on it. Obviously we think of it as needing to go to a financial advisor with a great big pot of money that you then want to invest, and you give it to them and you say, put this amount of risk, off you go, you do it for me. But if we're going to start to do it ourselves, what are your tips with that? Because you want to, I imagine, sort of educating yourself is quite important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So education really is like key, and having those fundamental understandings of what investing is and how it works. There are some brilliant books and resources out there on this topic. So one website that I would always send people to, because it has a lot of information, but it also has a tool which will help you to find a platform that fits what you need, is called Boring Money. So again, yeah, it sounds like it is what it says on the tin, but it's a Boring Money, but it's a very, very in-depth tool and resource that walks you through the basics, but then also allows you to filter by what you want. So you can say, okay, I want to invest £50 a month. I want to invest in sustainable investments only, and I want it to be done for me. I don't want to have to choose the investments. I want the platform to decide, and it will show you what your options are, and it will also show you what the fees are, and it will give you reviews as well. So it's a really brilliant resource for anyone that's looking to get into investing.
Wow, was that Boring Money, did you say?
Yeah.
Frantically writing this down. Fantastic. And I can see more questions coming in, and this is really important. So off the back of that, on the other hand, if you do feel or should I rephrase it, when is a good time to speak to a financial advisor, on the other hand, to decide, okay, actually I do want some advice with this? And then yes, off the back of that, is there somewhere you can go to make sure that financial advisor is accredited? Is there a sort of accreditation system, or is there a way of checking that you're not? Someone said, how do I make sure I don't get scammed? I think a lot of people are quite nervous about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So financial advisors typically work with people who have got a significant amount of assets. That is the biggest kind of thing to keep in mind, which is why it is actually really difficult to get an advisor to speak to you if you are an average person, because the way that financial advice traditionally works is that they take a commission of the assets that they are managing. So there are a lot of advisors who won't, for example, speak to anybody who doesn't have £100,000 in liquid assets or in investments. So it's quite a difficult kind of space to navigate, but they do have to be regulated and qualified. So you should be able to find out if they are if they are registered as a financial advisor. They are all searchable. There is I think it's on the FCA website, there is a page where you can search, and it will tell you if somebody, and also company as well, you can search for a company to check that they are regulated. What I would say though is that for anybody that's watching, and anyone that actually wants some support but that isn't in that bracket of client for a financial advisor, there are an increasing amount of companies that are starting to kind of bridge the gap of advice and coming into financial coaching. And financial coaching is actually much more about the client, and it's about your trying to help you with your, I guess, day-to-day money management and your financial goals if you don't have a huge amount of assets. And there are a couple of companies that I'll just say, like, who you can have a look at for that. One is called Claro, so literally just CLARO, Claro Money. They are also regulated by the FCA, so they do offer investments as well, but they have a financial coaching kind of service on there. So you can book in a call with somebody who can help you to talk through your financial situation and to give you some input and pointers into what you can do to maybe help start improving things. Another really great person is called she's called Wise Monkey Coaching. Simone, who's the founder of that company, is a brilliant financial coach as well, who I've worked with in the past, and she's quite hard to get a session with, but similarly she helps people, whatever their situation, to take a kind of bird's eye view of your finances and to start help implementing changes to get to where you want to be, really. So there are options increasingly out there if you are not the kind of typical client of a financial advisor.
Great, thank you so much. I'm sure everybody's frantically writing down all these great tips. Really juicy stuff, thank you. Oh, there's one thing that I really wanted to get your thoughts on, and this is going back to, you know, the issue of finance being in the news and what everybody's talking about online. But I know it'll have been top of your agenda, and I think I saw you talking about it on Instagram. Well known.
I know what's coming.
What's coming? I'm sure everybody watching knows what's coming too. A well-known television presenter, we won't say her name, last week, was it, implied that millennials simply need to give up their Netflix subscription and their gym subscription and their avocado on toast. And if they did all of that, then we'd all be able to afford to get into the housing market. We'd all be able to buy a house, basically. And it was met with huge amounts of disdain, as you can imagine, on the internet. What are your thoughts on that? Because it's very frustrating, isn't it? As a millennial myself, it's very frustrating to keep hearing that all our financial worries would dissipate if we would just give up those little luxuries.
It is, and I mean, I will start off by saying that the defensive response that then followed, I think, indicated that maybe those comments were not really thought through. But the reality is that the house price inflation over the last 20 years is unlike anything that has ever been seen before. And where you could buy a house on a reasonable salary with a small or even non-existent deposit 20 or 30 years ago, now the average, I think, deposit is £59,000, which is over double, I think, or somewhere near double the average salary. So the chances of average people being able to buy houses is so small now, and it's a huge issue, and it has been compounded by various different things. The government have not helped the situation, and you know, it's really tricky because I totally understand for homeowners, you want your house to maintain and to gain as much value as possible, but it is so unsustainable and so unattainable for young people who are not being gifted money. And I saw a statistic recently as well, which is I think that now the bank of mum and dad is in the top 10 lenders if it were a lender in the country, which shows the extent of the problem. Yeah. And you know, all it takes is running the numbers to really see how far out of reach it is, because it's not only about the deposit and the cost of the houses, it's also wages, because wage inflation has been very slow over the last kind of 20-30 years or so, and you know, people earning what was and still is by a lot of people's standards a good income still cannot borrow enough money to be able to get near buying a house. So it's really, really difficult. I really have a lot of sympathy for like all of the young people that are aspiring to buy houses, because we grew up, and this is something I could talk about for hours, but you know, we grew up being sold a dream ultimately, and sold what is effectively now not a reality. And no one did that maliciously, but our expectations were set that if we have a good career, we work hard, we do all of our exams, we would be able to do this. And now it's not the reality. So it's really, really difficult. But I think just understanding is what is key, and just having some compassion for different people's circumstances.
Totally, and understanding. And I know that the television presenters that have comments were taken out of context, so hopefully didn't have, you know, had good intentions behind it, but it hit a nerve, didn't it?
Yes, clearly.
You can see why. Do you think it's just so interesting? Do you think, as I spent some time living in Spain, I did a Spanish degree, and when I was there, they it's not as, certainly the place I was in Spain, in Madrid, not many people own property at the time. It was definitely more of a renting culture, and you'd own a property just to simply rent it out. There wasn't really this culture of aspiring to own property. It was seen as more of an investment. Do you think we're sort of headed in that direction? Or it's interesting, isn't it, that culturally we have been quite blessed with getting on the property ladder.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is such an interesting topic as well, because I have one of my closest friends lives in Spain, in Barcelona as well, and we were discussing the differences in the markets and how it works. And ultimately, what I think it comes down to is that here there is not enough protection for tenants, which is why people aspire to own homes, because they can't be kicked out of their home in a month's notice, which has happened to a few people I know in the last few months, and it's awful. And also there are strict, so there in mainland Europe there are quite strict regulations on tenancy terms. So you typically will have a long tenancy, and you'll be protected during that tenancy from the fees, your rent going up more than going up by inflation, which typically has not been that high. You're also protected from being kicked out without a significant amount of notice. You're also allowed to make changes to the property that you want to make without having to get permission. So it really is treated a lot more as though it's your home, I think, on the continent in a lot of places, whereas here there is just none of that protection. And it can be really, really brutal, particularly for people who have families, who, you know, you've got kids in a local school, you've got your job nearby, you've got your infrastructure. That fear that a landlord could, with a month's notice, kick you out and tell you you've got to uproot your life just isn't good enough. So I think that we need to improve. Yeah, we need those, the situation, the protection for tenants needs to improve if we want people to be comfortable with renting for much longer.
Absolutely. And in certain areas of the country, rent is so extortionately high, isn't it? You know, there's that incentive to get on the property ladder simply because your repayments on a mortgage might be half of what you'd pay in rent.
Yes, absolutely.
It's such a tricky one. And again, yes, we could talk about it forever, couldn't we?
Yeah.
I really want to get to some more questions quickly. We've only got 10 minutes. So so many coming through. Thank you so much, everybody. Everyone's really enjoying this, Ellie, and finding the tips.
Oh,
so
good.
Somebody said, Ellie, have you got a top tip to prevent or just lessen emotional/comfort spending? Any tips on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a massive subject as well. And I mean, what I will actually do, recommend a book, first of all, which is called Real Life Money. And it's written by a friend of mine, actually, who has basically documented her journey from having £27,000 of debt to being debt free. But it's a really great kind of story, because also this book she wrote when she was still in a significant amount of debt, and one of the big causes of that was the emotional spending. What I would say, and I mean, this will sound simple, but I know that in practice it's a lot harder, is trying to decouple your actions from your feelings is the key ultimately. And it is really difficult to do. But the first step I would say is to try and become aware of those moments when you're feeling that impulse. So the first step isn't about changing it, it's just about that awareness. So every time you feel like that urge to spend, pause and make a mental note or an actual note in your phone or something of like what it is that has set off that feeling, so that you can start to notice it. Because once you start to notice it, you'll start to preempt it. And once you start to preempt it, that's when you can start to put in place alternative mechanisms. So ultimately where you want to get to is where you are using something else as that escape or that kind of buzz that you're looking for. So it might be a case that, you know, when that happens, that you need to get outside and go for like a walk round the block, and that is the way that you distract yourself. That is quite a jump from the point where you might be at the moment, which I appreciate. But a smaller step, for example, and this is what I used for myself because I used to be a massive emotional spender, what I used is the basket. So literally the saved basket. So for me, my go-to was always clothes shopping. It still is a weakness that I have, is that every time I get an email from certain brands, will just click and browse. But I started to build this habit of saying, okay, when I want to buy something, actually I'm going to put it into the basket and then I'm going to close the tab and I will come back to it this afternoon or this evening. And if I still like it, fine. But it's nearly always that emotion in the moment that is distorting your view of whether you actually want that thing or not. And just that process of putting it in the basket and saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to walk away from it now and I'll go back to it. And by the point you go back to it, you've hopefully got a bit of a clearer perspective. You can then make a more rational decision. One other tip quickly that I would say for that as well is that if spending is really the thing that kind of scratches that itch for you, then find something that you can go and buy that is a lot less than the things you're typically buying. So even if it's a case of going to your local shop and buying yourself a £1 chocolate bar, that again is still changing the behavior from buying clothes, which typically can easily spiral into the hundreds. So there's just a few different things that you can maybe try there.
Yeah, that's such good advice, and I think the very fact that a couple of people asked that question, and I think to define it as an emotional spending means that you know already that it's linked to some kind of feeling, which I think that tip of checking in with yourself and thinking, okay, what specifically am I feeling right now? That's such a good tip, and like you say, using the basket so that when you come back to it, that feeling, like the weather, has probably passed and you're feeling something else and you are able to look at it with a different set of eyes. That's such good advice, and that's something I need to put into practice myself.
Also, yeah, I mean, it's never like a fail-safe solution, like that. We're all human, but just having some of these mechanisms like in your back pocket to try and help you, can, even if it helps, like a couple of times, and reduces the amount of emotional spending. That is kind of the aim.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody's asked, would you recommend living at home for as long as possible over renting? Gosh, if everybody had that luxury, that would be nice, wouldn't it? This is the problem,
yes,
isn't it?
It is. It is. And I mean, I think it's a really interesting topic, this, because we often, I say we, the media often talks about, privilege in home ownership, about people that have been gifted cash. But the reality is that if you are able to live at home rent free or for very little rent, that is effectively being given a financial benefit to help you by your family. So it just is a different form of the same help, which, yeah, if you can do it, is amazing, but for a lot of people it isn't possible. And what I would also say is that for some people, like, it isn't the right thing to do for them. I spoke to somebody recently in a a workshop where she was just in a situation where she just really wanted to get out of home. She'd been working for a couple of years, she was living at home, but she just felt like she needed some independence. And she was struggling with the fact that that would mean a loss of the ability to save as much as she was saving. And I said to her, you know, it really is about what is most important right now, because that is not always money. Saving as much as possible isn't always the most important thing. And especially when you're young, I think that there can be a huge benefit to living in a city or living on your own or with flatmates or housemates and learning to be an adult in a way, having to, you know, cook for yourself, pay the bills, pay rent, all of those responsibilities are really good for people a lot of the time, like from a kind of developmental perspective. So I think, you know, there are times for both, and I've definitely done both. And I definitely think that, you know, if you're set on buying, then, and it is an option, like great, it will help to speed up the process, but don't compromise absolutely everything else in your life just to get to that financial goal if there are other things that matter to you.
Absolutely. It's about the holistic well-being, isn't it, as well? Because I mean, again, big topic is the, you know, the huge discussion around the strain on relationships it can put, right? Lots and lots of adults living in a house together.
Yeah.
Can be tricky. So I think the answer to that question is you've got to do what's right for you. Haven't weigh it all up. And we all have to make these sacrifices and compromises, I guess, especially when it comes to money, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Like there isn't a cookie cutter answer. It really does depend on your circumstances and what feels right for you. You know, for some people, living at home like can ruin your relationship with your family. And if that is what it's going to do, it's not worth any amount of money.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, I wish we had longer with you, Ellie. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. But we're going to have to wrap up now, I'm afraid. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all of your wisdom. It has been wonderful talking to you. I've personally really enjoyed it as well, and I know everybody's got a lot from it. I hope you have. So thank you, Ellie.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and it's been really great to chat. And hopefully, yeah, that everybody has enjoyed it and got some useful tips to take away.
I hope so too, and I'm so sorry we didn't get to answer every single one of the questions that came in, but thank you so much for watching today and taking part and asking those questions. If you would like to, anyone that's watching, you will be sent a little follow-up email with a recording of this session so you can watch it back if you didn't quite manage to note down all of those wonderful resources that Ellie mentioned. And you'll also be sent a survey with a few questions. We'd love to know your thoughts and feedback so that we can shape the programme going forward. We really do read every single one of your comments, so thank you in advance for those. And if you'd like to see more sessions like this, let us know. If you'd like us to get Ellie back, let us know and we will do so. So thank you so much. Don't forget to check out the other events that we've got coming up in February and sign up for any that you're interested in, and we will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.